Yeah, right. Breathe. I know.
So yeah, it's nice.
So, welcome everyone. Happy to see you all tonight. Thank you for braving the nasty weather to come be with us. We're excited to get into some more, deeper information this evening than we did in the previous meeting, just getting to know all the other people in the room, and yeah, excited to get rolling. So thank you as well if you've answered the little homework check question, but hopefully some of the information, if you were able to watch a recording and flip through some of the one-pagers was helpful. Or if you want to toggle over, we can take a look. So also to speak to it quickly while we do that, we have some folks in the room already tonight from MPS teams related to enrollment, budget, and staffing, and some others who may trickle in as we go on. So wanted to give a chance for you all to introduce yourselves. If I can put you on the spot again, Mike, if you want to start.
Sure. My name is Michael Spidell. I work in student services. I'm the manager of enrollment.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Heather Lamoth. I'm manager of talent management and compensation.
Awesome. And I think y'all know the facilities folks, but back with us again. And then Nick's in room from the finance team will be joining us a little bit later on. So as we get into some more of the questions. So if we do that, we can sort of scroll through some of the answers here. Let's see. So spring planning and resolution meetings, awesome. Glad to hear that stuff on the one pager and just the timeline of everything. Big on nuts and bolts for kindergarten and high school. Sample application. And yeah, I'm not sure if folks had a chance to look too, there were the additional resources linked at the bottom that did go into a bit greater detail that Milwaukee Journal Sentinel actually published some articles really getting into the weeds on kindergarten. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, I would definitely recommend it.
And then transportation, will be getting into more of that. There was a comment.
Oh, yeah, I missed that
Transportation, so that will be diving into that one more next month, right?
Yes, and so spoiler alert, which will be told at the end of the meeting, but the next, so sort of these next three meetings, this one being enrollment, budget, and staffing focus, we'll move into transportation and programming for the next meeting in terms of digging into those details. And then for the following meeting after that, really getting into more of the facilities piece and just the building portfolio. So based on feedback we heard at the last meeting, and not just from this committee, but generally, we want to really maximize the time that we have tonight to work together and like have questions answered and really be engaging actively and not having so much of me speaking at you. So I'll try to move relatively quickly. Aaron, if we want to jump back to the presentation. But I'll move through this relatively quickly. I know we have some stuff at the top that we just wanted to cover. So while we're getting that pulled up, were there any, so yeah, the agenda you've seen already, but we'll move through these items pretty quickly, trying to maximize time for small group work. For the admin items, didn't see any comments or anything on the meeting. Any comments, questions, concerns as it relates to that? Okay, great. So other than that, so we have added new information into the Google Drive. You may have already seen that. A lot of it is on the back table there. So everything that is shared with you physically for the binder should also be in the Google Drive if you prefer to have the digital version. If you are having any issues with access, let us know. Obviously, we want to make sure that you can get to all of that. And then, yeah, so we're working to get anything that's not in there. Like, I think we haven't got the member commitment dropped in there, but like you have the physical version. So working on getting all that done. Did want to mention at the top, we did get some feedback specific to your region from someone on the Community Insights Forum. So just wanted to share that quickly with you all. The feedback was really about thinking about strategies for increasing enrollment and modernizing facilities. There was a lot of specific focus about Hamilton High School from this person who responded, and then also just some advice or a request to look around at neighboring districts to see what they're doing to sort of improve their facilities and how that might be replicated here. So just keeping that in mind as we move into the conversation for today. And then just to mention at the top too, because I know that we had it on there and again, to maximize time working collectively together. So at the end of this, as we talked about last time, we want to, use the conversations from today to help inform what questions are being asked of the wider community. So what we'll do is we've just folded it into the post-meeting survey, which will get sent out to you tomorrow. But it has an activity in there where you can drop in questions that you think should go sort of as a rotating featured questions from month to month that are related to the topics we discussed today. So after we wrap, the conversation around enrollment, budget, and staffing, we'd like to ask you to think of what are the right questions that we should be asking your constituents in the wider, stakeholder group across the district for their input. It can help inform this process better. So what we'll do is we'll take a few of those top questions, add them into the community insights form, so as not to have a dozen different forms as we go, and just have them be featured questions for that, and they'll stay in the form until the end of the next month's meeting. So have about a month of airtime for people to respond to that. Hopefully that makes sense. Just trying to save us some time on that back end. And then another small note. And so we did this last spring. We had put questions. Oh no, that thing is falling a few times. So we do have these great laminated maps. That one's not sticking well, but this one is going strong. But this is just to show, and you've got the paper copy of the same one showing the geographic regions and where all the schools are. It's worth noting the high schools have been just folded into the regions. So that is different from the setup of how the district manages everything. Obviously, high schools have their own region, but this is purely geographic. So you'll see just from a geographic sense where those are. And what I was saying here is just last spring, we folded in questions related to the long range facilities master plan to the strategic plan survey, really asking about why are families choosing the schools they are, what their perspectives are in school buildings. So we're developing questions to put in again this year. And, we'd like to have you all sort of take a look at those and make sure they make sense. So as we get them drafted, we want to share them out for your feedback. They're probably going to be aimed in a more broad sense of do people know what's going on, right? Are they aware of the project? Do they feel like they have access to the resources? So those are kind of theme-wise what we're thinking, but just wanted to at least plant that seed, and we'll plan to follow up with you all on that front. So before I move into this, which I will not spend a ton of time on, any admin questions? Everything pretty straightforward? Great. So hopefully you all had a chance to watch the recording and hear us sort of go through these details. I'll quickly glide through each slide just to touch on what it is. If you have a question that is for an important clarification, feel free to raise your hand. We want to make sure it makes sense. But if it's more we want to get into a conversation about why this is this way and how we can do something about it, we'd ask you to just kind of hold on to that until we get into that small group work so that we can spend more time really digging in and having that sort of breakout approach. Sound good? Awesome. So just starting off with kind of an overview of the enrollment across the city of Milwaukee. So this is the orange line is all the students made up from MPS independent charters. So that would be non-instrumentality and non-MPS charters, and then private choice program schools. From there, just moving into the market shares and how those have changed over time since 2008, and just seeing how that shift has been growing and increasingly prominent. Nationally, seeing a lot of the same things, at least in the sense that district school enrollment is going down and the share of students who are in there is going down, where charters are going up, and their market share, if you will, has increased from 4.5% to 7.5%, and private schools are actually far more modest in that sense in terms of their increases nationwide. Funding changes, so I mentioned this on the recording if you remembered, but this is not showing the total per pupil funding for those school programs. This is just meant to highlight sort of the increased competition that is on the horizon due to these recent changes. So what this means is that now for every student that enrolls at a private choice program or an independent charter, the dollar amount is going to be that much higher. And I know that out of context without having the total amount, I think those numbers when we spoke with Nick last night were $8,000 or $9,000 per student. And previously high school and K-8 were the same for voucher programs. And they have now obviously been separated, but it was really just to emphasize that, competition will be increasing, not going in any other way. Then we did quickly just cover the details of the recent referendum that passed. Was there question? No, I thought I saw him. Nope, all right. So yeah, just highlighting, the 252 million over the next 4 years to help address the budget shortfall, seeing where the inflation adjusted budget was coming from, the impact that had on per pupil funding. So in comparison with 10 other districts in the metro area, as well as the 10 largest districts in the state. Also noting that, MPS is significantly larger than the next largest district. So not exactly apples to apples, but also getting into some of the differences with student demographics and how that shows up. So in that sense, we talked about the percentage of students in Milwaukee who are economically disadvantaged, and the sort of consistency or similar trends as it relates to other providers in the city with private choice and charter schools. So hovering around that 80% point. English learners, how just the level of increase that's happening and the rate at which it's happening. So noting that is increasing steeply for all providers, and that, there are costs associated with making sure those students have services. And that's kind of the theme throughout is, right, all of these lead students with higher needs and then districts needing to do more to meet those needs. And then really, sort of digging into students with disabilities and the contrast there. So noting that MPS, about 20% of the student population is sort of falls into that special education classification, excuse me. And then, charters about half that, and the data is not, it's very limited for private choice programs. They're not obligated or required to share all their data. But even the higher estimates, when you fold in the special needs scholarship program was about just over 3% total. I know I'm moving quickly here. So from there, just looking at national trends showing that, the percentage of special education students is increasing, as well as English learners is also going up. So this is consistent with what we're seeing nationally. And then, going into the staffing piece at the district sense. So seeing that, there's been headlines recently showing the vacancies that exist within MPS and the impacts that those are having on students, especially students who are maybe already classified as vulnerable. And, filling the vacancies would be great and support students more. Yes, it would also just sort of emphasize the urgency to sort out financial challenges and really just sort of increasing the importance there. And then this last chart is just highlighting that MPS actually has a lower teacher to student ratio, or I guess teachers per 100 students to be specific, than all the other districts in the state, including the next 6 largest districts there. Which is unique, I guess, in the sense of what you're seeing nationally, where, you have staff numbers that are steadily increasing even as enrollment is on the decline there. So what that might emphasize is just that, staff reduction might not be as useful of a solution for this district as it might be for other districts where it is sort of a more growing staff count. All right, moving from there to special education funding. So this is just really highlighting the special education funding gap that exists. So you have the feds who are covering around 15%, the state, which has now since increased to just under a third that they're covering. And so showing that in 2019, 2020, there was about I believe it was $155 million gap that was not covered in special education funding. What we wanted to highlight is just the impact that has. So when you're looking at, and hopefully this chart makes sense, but you have the per pupil funding for students in Milwaukee, that $2,072 is that 155 million spread out across all the per pupil funding. So the per pupil funding is going down by $2,100 to cover the gap. So all other gen ed students are now having less per pupil funding as a result. And just the differences that has from a district to district, and depending on sort of the makeup of that district from a student demographic standpoint, it impacts them differently. From there, last but not least, just talking about the number of schools compared to enrollment. So noting that, since 1994, the amount of MPS school buildings has, the amount of students has gone down by about 30%. The amount of school buildings has only decreased by about 4%. So just the sort of outline changes that are happening there, which ended up with a reduction in the average amount of students per building. And this is something that is consistent with what we're seeing nationally. So nationally, you have districts that are actually opening more schools. So there are more schools open now. And even though there is a steeply declining number of students, which just sort of projects, some really hard financial decisions, potential school closures, staff reductions that are on the horizon nationwide. And then sort of factoring in all the other changing variables, the federal level and everything, it just really adds to the uncertainty with it from that standpoint. So race through that. Hopefully that was helpful. Clicker's not going. If we can go to the next slide. So what we'll do next is go into the district versus region analysis. One of the things that we put together, and I'll have Laren pull it up, and this is what we ask you to bring if you're able to bring a computer or tablet if you want to sort of dig in. We're setting up a data dashboard that allows you to filter by region. So it is not obligatory to have a device with you this evening. Should those meetings come up where we feel like you really need one to participate, we will work to provide those for you. But this is a sort of a snapshot of it. So in the upper left there, you can sort of select your region. And you have each of these, it's a lot of graphs all at once, but each graph is sort of showing different details about your region and the enrollment details for now. So upper left is showing just total enrollment and how it's changed since 2014, 2015. And we will be sharing the link on the next slide for this. Trends by school level. And then you have just sort of the last 5 years as it decreases. And we'll get into this, it's all on slides, but on the left, you can also, once you've selected a region, you can select a specific school and see their enrollment trends. And we're working to get like attendance area data and all the other fun stuff. But I just want to openly ask, like, if there are details that you think would be really insightful to see on this dashboard or other data that we're not showing, like, please let us know. We can't guarantee that we can add it. But if there are points that we want to make sure that we're sort of illuminating as much as possible for y'all. Yeah.
I don't know if it would be so critical in the dashboard, but when you're using the metric of like number of schools, you may want to convert that to square footage. Because as an example, a lot of MPS's elementary schools are bigger than a parochial school or even Shorewood or somebody else. So that then falls into how many classrooms they can have per building. And it's really probably a more useful metric to get down to square footage.
Yeah, I think I see your point on square footage. I do think and this is where I think capacity will be a bigger thing. And as we get into that facilities meeting too, but knowing that, not all space can necessarily be occupied, even if it's there. So wanting to make sure that that's fair. But I agree that showing it from multiple angles is really important so that we're not just honing in on like, this is the number of schools, they're all, created equal, size-wise. So yeah, it's a really good point. Thanks for sharing.
One comment that I have is maybe like the teacher to student ratio. I can't tell if that's on one of those charts from back here yet or not.
It is not on this chart.
Okay, I
Nope.
just can't.
Yep.
tell from
No,
this.
that, and these charts are gonna be blown up, Lauren, if we wanna go back to the presentation. So just wanted to give you a quick sort of how-to on how to navigate it. The link will be there, but the handful of slides that we prepared for district versus region, before we sort of break out into doing the small group work, we'll sort of cover those and specify what's in there. And again, stop me at any point, but just highlighting district-wide sort of trends we're seeing, just to specify these percentage drops that you're seeing in red are between the two boxes. It is not, so it's not to say 14% drop since 2003. It is 19% between 2003 to 2014-15, but just showing the sort of declining enrollment that does predate, sort of pandemic times. You'll see on these charts that it goes back to 14-15. And there was more of a plateauing and leveling off and then sort of drifting from there. But we wanted to highlight that this does obviously predate pandemic impact as well. This is the East region. This one did not get updated, but the data dashboard will have the Southwest region. Apologies on that, but it'll just show how enrollment has changed on that front. So we'll make sure we get that updated. We are going to be sharing out the meeting slides with you tomorrow as well. And so I know last time we sort of waited until the end and then it became like a 1 week or 2 week wait for you all, or week and a half, but we want to try to give you as much as possible right away. So we'll make sure we have that fixed. I'm pretty confident the other ones are corrected. So just before we get into them, I want to highlight, and this is on the project website if you've seen it, but just the number of different grade level configurations that exist within MPS. And so there are a lot, right? Like there's 10 different configurations. For the sake of simplicity and sort of being able to represent the data, we have sort of consolidated those just for the sake of being able to look through them as elementary, middle, K-8, and high school. We do think these differences are important. It also can create some challenges from standardizing support, obviously, which is something we'll get into a little bit more in that programming part of the transportation and programming meeting. But you'll see these next graphs just sort of going through that there's only 4 lines, right? Not 10 lines for each of the different school types. So just for the sake of being able to show that data, we wanted to highlight the sort of adjustment that was made. So this is what you're seeing district-wide by school level and just how each school type is changing since 2014-15. So noting that high school is actually kind of stable and almost increasing before sort of dropping. And this is really around that sort of COVID-19 time where you're starting to see the effects of that. And then you have middle school at the bottom. So blue is middle school, orange is elementary school, green is high school, and yellow is K.
Can I ask a question, because I didn't go to Milwaukee Public Schools? And,
Yeah.
when did they stop doing middle schools? Like, that was a change, right?
So middle schools are still going,
I
but
know,
there was,
I mean, I
okay.
have a daughter at a middle school,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
like,
okay.
I was just curious because, like, from what I understood, there used to be more middle schools
Did you
and,
make the change to the K-8s?
yeah. when
Yeah,
did that
there was
happen?
I don't know if you want to talk about it in a
Sure,
sec.
so when the district went to a public neighborhood school initiative, there was quite a movement during that time to move to K-8s. So a lot of the schools moved to K-8s and cut the middle school, but obviously the K-8s were coming from middle school, so a lot of middle schools just kind of.
And when was that around?
2004 is
Okay.
when the neighborhood schools initiative, like, kind of finished the building, and so there were additional transformations through about 2014, 15, with schools changing K-8. Oftentimes because their enrollment was going down,
Oh,
so they saw that as a way to maintain their enrollment numbers.
Yeah, that's a great question, and we can make sure we add some resources detailing NSI if you want to read into it a little bit more and see sort of what the thinking was, yeah. And yet there is a legend up here, it's just really small, which is why I wanted to point out the color line. So then when you shift to the Southwest region, you see that, you know, the high school enrollment trend is actually a bit different, was sort of declining throughout, whereas going back to district, you see it was more about a stable line. But then, you know, with K-8, similar trends in enrollment, elementary enrollment as well. And so our goal here is not to like hit you with big aha takeaways, it's just pointing out like what we're seeing on these data as we compare district-wide to the regional piece. We want to sort of give you the tools to look into it yourself, look at school-specific stuff, and not spend our time presenting as I continue to talk, I know. So district-wide, hopefully you've seen these charts before, but this is just showing sort of the, you know, percentage of schools. So that lost enrollment, this is over the last 10 years. The charts that you'll see on the dashboard are over the last 5 years. So this is the Southwest region. And you'll see that, you know, there have been enrollment declines pretty consistently across the region. For the schools, save for a few that had a couple upticks. It is worth noting that they're pretty modest in relation to the district wide. So if you look back here, like some of these bigger numbers are like, this is 800 students that were lost over that 10-year span. And so the 200, like 100 mark is really in here. So the drops are more modest in the Southwest region when you compare them. And then you're seeing larger declines in elementary schools and K-8s. District-wide, the last sort of table that we'll share, this is basically breaking out by school size with enrollment. So I really want to clarify that this is not capacity of school, but the actual number of students who are enrolled in the school. So really trying to look at it from, again, the size of a school. So at the far left, that is a 0 to 200 students enrolled. And sort of each of those colors makes up a different school type, building up, but just showing how many schools within the district fall into that sort of size range. So then it goes up by 200 for the most part each time. So 200 to 400 and 400 to 600 is where the vast majority of MPS schools fall. The vast majority also being elementary and And then from there, you know, you have 600, 800, and then this one on the end is 1,000 to 3,000. So some of those larger high schools that fall into that category. When you look at that from the Southwest region specifically, you'll see that there are no schools that fall into that 0 to 200 range, which is unique in that they're, you know, sort of spread out most with K-8s, obviously sort of ranging in size, given that there's sort of the most variability there that is consistent with district-wide trends, and then high schools on the larger end. So again, you'll have a chance to dig into this yourself. If not here, you can also obviously use the dashboard at home that is live and going to be added to the website as well. So the last thing I wanted to note is just enrollment at neighborhood schools. So this is another piece that you may recognize from the website, but we don't have that attendance area piece that's sort of showing quite yet on the dashboard. But what we are hoping to do is really highlight for each school where those students are coming from. And that's something we will also get into more in the next meeting, but we want you to see that there's actually, you know, students are coming from all over to go to different schools, given the sort of open choice structure of the district and how you're seeing that. So, you know, the challenges that creates from projections and just understanding where students are going to end up. Something I mentioned in our meeting yesterday was just for comparison, Chicago Public Schools, you may know, has been, you know, sort of taking on a big effort to sort of go back and bring back neighborhood schools in a greater way and making some policy changes around that. And just for comparison, knowing that it is not apples to apples, it's obviously a massive district, but they have about 56% of their elementary school students who are going to neighborhood schools. And that is the lowest it's been in a long time. And then they have about 25% of their high school students who are going to neighborhood schools. So it is different. Obviously, their district is set up differently, and they have historically been more neighborhood focused. So just for some hopefully helpful context. So I know I've been talking fast. Any questions about anything I've shared? Otherwise, we can get into the small group. So before we sort of break out, and what we'll do is just for the sake of sort of ability to hear one another as well. I know we're a slightly smaller group tonight, so even if we combine these two groups, but we have the room next door, so we can even just walk out there and have a little more audio separation. So last night it was just harder to hear with the two groups sort of right next to one another. So before that, just wanting to speak to, so if you want to scan the QR code, you're welcome to. This is the data dashboard. You also, and again, I don't know how mobile friendly it is. We're just building these tools custom for MPS, and we are not a software company, so trying to make as much useful data as we can, but owning our shortcomings as well. So the time breakdown, we'd like to give you about 30 minutes for breakout discussion. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at the questions we shared out in advance. If not, no problem. We'll go through them in a second. But then we'll sort of have everybody come back in the same room, sort of report out. If you can pick somebody who will be your designated speaker to share just kind of the key takeaways, what your group discussed. And we want to give the other group time to ask questions on that too. There is a URL if that's easier as well. And yeah, the last thing I want to mention is just the objectives. So going back to some of the norms and expectations that were talked about, and hopefully you had a chance to look at those should be in your binder now as well. But one that came up a couple times was like accepting non-closure. We don't expect you to come up with a solution for any of the challenges that we've discussed or are going to be discussing here. The goal is really to sort of turn over every stone and be looking at it from a new perspective, make sure that we are being thoughtful about like what data would be helpful, what potential policies might be helpful, and really creating this shared knowledge base to operate from within. So that when we do move into like selecting strategies and prioritizations and implementation, that we are really entering that space very well informed, understanding the trade-offs and challenges that do exist. So really, you know, this meeting and the next two are about just like keeping you all super informed, having you let us know what other information would be helpful, you know, having the folks in the room who work in these departments who can answer questions for you. Yeah, so without further ado, we can move into the questions. So I'll read through, like, summarize of these really quickly, and then we can sort of break out. Kevin, I think we had some, were you able to get the printout ones? If you want to snap a photo of it too, the other room, just so we have them. I can also bring them. We'll have, we're gonna spread out with you and sort of help support the tables and facilitate, help with any questions. But so the first one, really just talking about what factors you think are driving school selections in your region. And we'd love to, if possible, like hear things that are specific to your region. Obviously, we know that it all sort of rolls up district-wide as well. But you know, we want to make sure that we're capturing your unique perspectives. What other information could be helpful in identifying why families are choosing or not choosing MPS schools? How MPS can more effectively attract and retain students, and what support resources or resources might be helpful. From there, enrollment trade-offs. So knowing that, you know, larger schools versus smaller schools, like having those sort of resource differences and the trade-offs there, and how can the district try to, you know, size schools correctly to optimize their support. Number 4 is a lengthy one, but really wanting to talk about, you know, we've talked a lot about competition with other districts and other providers, you know, within the city. But it's also important to highlight, you know, the challenges and that come from the sort of internal competition within MPS for students. When you think about that per pupil funding, and how schools, you know, the unintended consequences of where schools might end up in sort of a resource spiral where, you know, if the enrollment drops and they can't provide the same services, and then their enrollment might continue to drop, and like how MPS can, you know, try to address that in a really intentional and systematic way. And then number 5, just any policy considerations that you think make sense around this. So we want to keep that in the background. We know not all of this is a matter of solving it with building decisions. And so going back to the last part that we mentioned the last meeting, like what are the things that landed us in this position in the first place, and sort of how do you start to address root causes of issues where they might exist? So I've said a lot. Any questions before we jump in? Clarifications about the content or landscape analysis? All right, great. So yeah, if y'all are comfortable with it, for you, maybe we can all move to the room next door, and then we'll keep the questions up here for this group.
Oh, this, you want us?
No, we'll go next.
All or half of this movie.
All 4 of you. are going- Yes. 1, 2, 3,
All of the
and then-
subset of the masses.
Yes, these 2 tables, because one of you have to move anyway, we'll both just go next door.
Alright.
And we will spend the next half hour sort of working through it.
So. Really my purse. Yeah, it's kind of close and check that. You still have to leave it set.
Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you for letting me know. I'm good.
I'm back again, I'm the Southern regional.
Yeah.
Yeah, I not me, first time. My husband just won 7 marathons, 7 continents, 7 days, actually 6 days, so he was just in New York, yes, on Monday.
That's awesome.
Friend. So my IL.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, she's still more than welcome to come, but
That was helpful.
yeah, but yes, we came basically back down to no worries.
One of the.
What do you think is driving people to select the schools in the Southwest region?
We're using them a lot. Do we use them for a lot of sped?
We haven't been using for us, so we're gonna.
So this is very interesting because we just had in our school conference where we had to dig into our
Curious, I mean,
top three
my initial
years.
reaction was
There
almost, yeah,
are
we're almost done, DJ.
schools where we have to get into our
Okay.
school, and then in eighth grade,
see,
where was
like,
our students
You know, it
going?
was pretty new, I think, when I was in
Because
high
I
school.
had it wrong.
Kids that-
I was, I had the K five right,
So who are your top
Ours,
three
it was
tiers?
like a unique offering.
the Blackie, yeah,
Definitely.
Huntsville,
Yeah.
and, there's the other one that's other age.
Howard, wait, no.
Academy,
Alabama, nope, we don't even mess with Alabama. Alabama, nope, I don't even know if we got any kids from Alabama at all. What's the name of that?
Forest
It doesn't start with A, my bad. And then we'd be out to Audubon, of course, Hamilton, and Pulaski. See, I thought it was gonna be south, but it was actually Pulaski.
But that's close to you.
Which is.
And especially if it's Milwaukee kids going there, then they will go to that.
So is there thoughts as to why or something?
So for Hamilton and Pulaski, a lot of our ESL students go there because they have a bilingual program. That's why I thought South is going out because they have one too.
I don't know if they have bilingual.
Who?
They have a bilingual program? I
I
know
know Pulaski does.
Pulaski
Pulaski,
does.
South,
I thought Hamilton, I thought they told me Hamilton does.
They might have them now, they have a pretty.
Audubon
don't know
does
that they
not.
do.
No,
I don't think
I
you
think
do
there's
that,
South
that's,
and Pulaski are
yeah.
there too.
that's,
I thought
Bilingual
Hamilton was telling
environments.
us they did. That's why the kids went there.
okay, so
But
they're
they
going
never
for
visit.
language,
In that situation, our monolingual students are kind of. A lot of them go to Audubon. A lot of our monolingual students do stay at Audubon. And I'll probably say because it's comfortable, they know the staff already, they're familiar with the building. It kind of makes sense. It's right there.
for question one would be, so like the factors that are driving people to select the Southwest region in order to stay. I guess I'm curious the number of specialty schools or specialty programs that are offered at every school based on regions. Cause like when I just look at the Southwest region, it's like as a glance, so you have Tech has all of their trade programs, at least for high schools, cause like that's my realm, I guess. South Division is bilingual programs, they also have the South Accelerated Academy, so some of our students go there if they're not on track to graduate. Pulaski has IB, and they also have bilingual programs. Audubon has NAF and Tech. Reagan's an IB program, Lowell's an IB program, Wedgwood,
Wedgwood has,
bilingual.
bilingual.
So I guess I'm just curious, like the number of specialty schools and or specialty programs based on region, and I don't think that's necessarily been covered or featured.
that, I think there's actually, something
I
on
was
the
gonna say, I
long-range
feel like-
plan that talks about that, so I can look for that while you guys continue going on.
I think too, some of the schools have more language ESL at them and more services, so people will end up for like the K-8s and the K-5s, because I think that's like, you would just know that, like you would talk to your neighbors, or like Catholic Charities recommends an elementary school because they offer more ESL. That's how I understand it, anyway, how elementary school kids end up places. I was gonna say, like, a reason that I hear from a lot of parents about why they're not going somewhere is because I think there's too many types there.
Safety, like
Yeah,
safety, yeah.
safety issues. I think they're pushing the K-8s because they feel like, hey,
It's safer.
no, K through 8 and I'm done.
Oh,
I don't
less
have to,
transition.
let's transition, let's move in. Bam.
I've- I've heard people say that it's safer to be at a K-8, but like when my kids were really little and starting elementary school, I preferred them to be at a K-5 because I didn't want them with those big kids there.
So if you go to the long range planning site, and you guys can see it from the computer, but this is by school board district, and you guys are pretty much for district 6 and 7. So that's these two bars here, and this shows like the number of specialty programs, you know? So the taller the bar, the more there are. So basically, you guys have quite a few. I mean, there's some others that are close. But, obviously combined, you guys have quite a few specialty programs.
Or even just by like this region, how it's, like a lot of our questions are based on like the Southwest region, like we're working on, but doesn't align to obviously like the school board district.
Yeah.
You don't have these notated for community schools as well, because I know there are several of these are probably community schools. Because then you get extra funding and
Yes,
extra programming.
Because, is it Forest Home or Allenfield Community School? One
I
of
think
them is
Ellen
community school.
Fields, the Blocky,
Yeah,
Lowell.
they're community schools, so they do get that extra money, because I know when we went there, and I was like, but what makes, okay, so how did they, that was my question. How did these schools get chosen to be a community school?
So the person that might come back, Dr. Gamblin, she's the regional and handles the community programs. They're mostly for partnerships. So if she comes back, she definitely can do
Right.
and I'll get you more information on that.
I don't think that's something that parents know when they're choosing a school. I think it's just something that like you end up being like, oh, it's a community school, but I don't know what that means or.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't think it's very wrong.
They typically have like some type of partnership with an agency. I mean, like, for instance, I think South Division kind of has something
Oh,
with
yeah, South Division does.
16th Street Community Clinic. So each one of them kind of have those components.
And there's a staffing component, I believe, that comes with it.
They get a community
Hopkins,
coordinator.
yeah, community coordinator, so.
That person does a lot of work in the school to get like better playgrounds or like activities, field trips, things that people don't have to pay for. I don't think parents really know any of that stuff. I think they just hear from their friends where their kids are going and then just go there.
I would kind of second that to some extent. I can't speak, I haven't really been part of a lot of the elementary schools in the area. Both my children went to Humboldt Park, which is in the eastern block here, but at least for that school, that's a K-8 school. And it was a very, very diverse school, and however, it did have a very large Hmong group there, and I think it was community, because a lot of those people came from the far northwest side of town where they all lived, because we had a lot of busing issues during all the busing issues a couple of years back that were coming down to Humboldt Park. So I have to believe that, having talked to some of the parents and people at the school while my kids were there, that they kind of just followed what their smaller community did, because a lot of other people were going there, so they sent their kids there, so.
Yeah, so like I live here and like most of my neighbors, a lot of them, all bus their kids over here. And Fernwood
That's
and Bayview,
Same.
Montessori. Like, I don't know why I didn't, because I wanted to walk my kids to school before my home. And I didn't want to put them on a bus when they were little, but like, so many of my neighbors do that,
We
because
did
they're friends
the
too.
same thing, we're 15 to Oklahoma, and we went to Humboldt. Mostly because when we looked around, it seemed the best fit, and we really liked the fact that it was multi-diverse as far as, racial background and stuff, so. And that's having only looked at about 5 schools, and this is again, early 2000, but way early 2000s, so. So.
If you have the same kind of resources or programming in those schools that were closer to you, would you send them to those particular schools? Or is that, is a Montessori not as big a factor for you when you're?
I didn't, I wanted my neighbor at school, but I think I'm unusual in that.
What did you do this one time?
The Blocky.
We're directly exactly halfway between Zablocki and Morgandale. And we looked at both of them and it just, I think there was a bit, it's kind of strange, but, it was a different, makeup of, like the schools were, like, at that time, Morgandale was set up as like a bilingual school, so there was like each grade level, there was a class that taught mostly Spanish and a class that taught mostly English. I liked that. But again, really, a lot of the student body at that school was very, it wasn't as diverse as when we went out over to Humboldt Park and saw that school, so it seemed that kind of worked better for us, and we ended up driving there pretty much for many years, driving our kids back and forth each day.
Just gonna interrupt real quick, sorry, I kind of joined late, but I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Nick Center, I'm the Director of Financial Planning and Budget Services for MPS. So I wanted to see if anyone had any questions about school funding or just how we do budgets in general. And give a quick overview, that would be
We've only got
helpful.
in
Right,
one.
or we could go to question 4 while you're in the room.
Yeah.
So what are the unintended consequences of an enrollment-based funding model, and how can MPS balance the financial sustainability? So most of you know that the more students you have, the more money you get in your budget, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so when schools are seeking to increase their budget, they are enrolling more students. But I think part of the imbalance, the balance is given that enrollment dictates budgets, what strategies could prevent under-enrolled schools from being caught in the cycle of declining resources. So if we've got a set number of students and some schools over-enroll, that means others are under-enrolled. And I think the cycle here that we're referring to is once you're under-enrolled, the number of resources and things that your budget can provide diminish compared to a school that may be over-enrolled. And so it's the spiral, like where.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know for sure how much that drives, choice compared to maybe media reputation, things like neighborhood. So I know there's a lot of factors that go into a parent's choice, but yeah, once you start to hit a certain kind of threshold, you really don't get the same like economy of scale and the same efficiency. So instead of being able to fund, really fun, nice programs that families want, you start to see that decline, and then that feeds into as a feedback loop into parental choice. Well, I want my kid to be able to go take AP classes, work in a STEM lab, have access to not just music, but maybe orchestra. Well, that it really takes you need a density or like an economy of scale in order to actually have those offerings. I was gonna try and put together a better, kind of more thought out estimate, but I would say like if you get once you start getting below 150 for a elementary school, probably even more like 200, it gets to be quite a challenge. And then if you're talking high school where things are just kind of generally more expensive, you have more needs, usually access to like more expensive, maybe computers, sporting equipment. So there, I would think you really want to be more like 500 or more. One of the things that really surprised me when I came to the district was I just assumed that all of MPS had really high class sizes, and that's not really the case
I think
always.
people don't know that too. I
Yeah.
mean, just again, like, I think parents are making choices not really based on anything more than what their friends are telling them. Like,
I would guess that's a
I
really
mean,
good
I would
approach.
think that people would look at a school that they think is not as good and think that it has large class sizes, but have they ever gone in there to see? Like, they might not. I don't know.
I would say, so I work at Reagan, we sometimes have discussions with staff members of like, would you prefer to have a little bit higher class sizes? And then you have extra money to do X, Y, or Z with, right? But it's like a kind of trade-off for teachers. And so a discussion of, doesn't matter if you have 30 kids or 25 kids in a high school, not really, like 5 kids doesn't really make that much of a distinction, but if they're willing to have larger class sizes, then maybe we can fund X, Y, or Z, that's a little bit extra for the kids, like you're saying, it costs more.
Question, how much ability does MPS have at changing the model? I mean, I understand that a lot of, I understand and look at it per student amount of money you get from the state and from other places and federal and stuff, but when that money comes here, do you, as part of our input, one of the things we could bring up is a different way to look at spending the money and it's spreading it around. Does MPS have the ability to change that, how money is allocated?
We do.
So-
Yeah, we do. I mean, well, actually, yeah, we have a lot of flexibility.
Okay.
We can decide, the state provides us with a per pupil allocation. And then we in turn, the state of Wisconsin money follows the kid, whether it's to the school district, and we do the same thing at the school level. So even if a kid is staying in between MPS, or switching between 2 MPS schools, we will adjust the budget in fall, and that money follows the kid to support their education. And so we give $5,000 per pupil to the school as that's money within their discretion. So we have 3 different pots of money. We have what we call our per pupil allocation that goes right to the school for the principal's discretion. And then we have our central office staff, human resources, finance, maintenance, things like that. And then we have what we call essentially funded school supports, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but things like centralized music teachers. The board wanted to make sure that there was equitable access to music teachers, so we will fund that support centrally. We also do a lot of things centrally because we get an economy of scale, or it just makes sense. It's like we don't have schools pay for their busing, we pay for busing centrally, we pay for utilities centrally. So there's less flexibility with that pot of money because some of those are just business needs. We spend $30 million a year on utilities, that's gonna go up probably $1 million every year, and we don't really have much of a choice on that. But in terms of the per pupil, we definitely have, and some of the other discretionary funding that the board has decided, we do have quite a bit of flexibility with that, with the exception that we get a lot of grant funding that has allowable uses, it's gotta be used for that. And then I would say probably our biggest limitation, or one of the biggest challenges that we face as a district, is that we have discretion in how we do special education funding, but we have legal requirements and our students have legal rights to receive an education regardless of their disability. And so where that becomes a challenge is that the state will reimburse us for 30% of special education funding, but the reality that's not enough. And so higher costs special needs students, we have to subsidize their education really by using per pupil funding that was given to us for another student. So, but there is quite a bit of room for the board to decide they wanted to do things differently.
So if we decided, okay, let's mix up the funding model. I'll give you an example. Someone threw out an idea yesterday, was maybe staff at a more challenging school should get a higher rate of pay than staff at a school with, less challenging issues, so that we could, what she was saying is attract teachers to the students that need it. How do we make sure that we're staffing in those hard to fill positions, so that
Which
was.
makes a lot of sense. Now I always have to be the bad guy in my job, which is unfortunate, but some devil's advocate there is that if I pay a teacher more at one school, that means I have to pay a teacher less at another school.
Yeah.
Well, and the work's different, right?
Work's very different.
The work might be more at IB schools, the work for teachers is way different than it is at a Montessori school, and so doing that, there's like no, there's no way to be like, oh, what you do or what you, your region is more important than X, Y, or
So that was just
Z.
thrown out there as a,
You
you know,
we'll go there.
out of the box, like,
Yeah.
you know, something change with the funding model.
And another kind of option, what I see in like nationally, there's kind of trends where, yeah, the funding model often changes, sometimes it's slowly, sometimes it's quickly, but typically, and like at MPS, we have a kind of hybrid model between like a decentralized, like give it to the principal, they know their kids best. And then a central, the board has things they think are really important, and we wanna make sure that those are funded. So we're kind of somewhere in the middle. I've been told historically that swings kind of like a pendulum back and forth, and that like MPS used to be much more decentralized. And then there were principals who were slow to adopt computers, and so you had this inequity where you might have kids that weren't getting computer labs, they might have been getting better education in other ways, but we're not getting access to technology, and so that's kind of where I was aiming for. That's when the board started to swing back more centralized to ensure that kids had access to like computers and then now music and so there's
I
definitely
think
different options.
that's hard. I would remember being at a PTO meeting a while ago, this was a long time ago, and it was like, oh, we have this amount of funding, like, do you guys think we should have art and music and I was like, yes, and then other people were saying, but we want more safety or computers or, and it's like, some of that stuff should just be basic, like, every school should have that, at least a little bit. And it does seem like we've done that with music, where all the schools have, well, my elementary school is actually.
Yeah, it's a vacant position or, yeah.
But like,
A lot of positions are centralized, like at least in the high school budget, like world language, special ed. Like I think honestly, only the 4 core teachers are not centralized.
That's probably true.
Yeah, like the rest is all centralized in terms of, yeah.
And yeah, you got some paras, you have some implementers, principals might choose to have a certain specialty emphasis, we have an ag school, we have an art school. But no, that's probably a very accurate observation, that the majority, they're probably centralized.
I think it's only the 4 core.
ESL,
Centralized. Yeah, all the AMP stuff.
all the camp.
Yeah.
Can we go to number 2, cause I just wanted to like talk about that one a little bit. What kind of incentives have ever been provided to like tell families like, hey, it would be really great if you went to a neighborhood school, you wouldn't have to get on a bus, so we'll give you something for not getting on that bus. For elementary school, and maybe like high schools like in your region, so you're not getting on a bus all the way across town. I was just curious about that.
We never had the luxury, honestly.
But like, wouldn't you look at like how much the bus is costing and then you could like give something back?
I wish they would, I figured this year, we bused 40,000 students
I
in
know.
the morning,
Right.
40,000.
Like, wouldn't you be able to say like, if you're not taking a seat on the bus, we'll give you a laptop?
So I think.
I mean, like, come on, like, it just,
Yeah.
I don't know if that just is like too
Sure.
obvious, but.
Yeah, I think that'd be a great one. Lauren, can you help us remember to bring that up next month?
Incentives more for the transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, a trade, like this or that. I think the biggest thing, at least, I always say this, in the Southwest region, I was really surprised that Nate didn't say this, but, I'm the regional superintendent for the Southwest region, so we really pride ourselves, on our enrollment. We work really hard on the enrollment. We have like the highest enrollment. We're very proud of that. We're busting at the seams. Nate was pretty flat on that, and I was just like back there, like wringing my hands, because every day we talk about enrollment. We had Fairview that we added on to, Greenfield we added on to, and we have additional spaces, so we're really proud about that. In addition, our attendance is very high, but poverty never gives up. And so we can't give up at MPS on poverty either. So the buses are a must. He talked about CPS and how they're going to neighborhood schools. A lot because of our, and I'm just gonna like toot for a second.
The CPS model, because
They're dysfunctional.
Yes.
I mean, the urbans in their nature, it's not the blending, but urbans in all of their nature. have some dysfunction in some way, right? That's our specialty, kind of like what we're doing with. But my point to your comment is that people want, that busing transportation is so expensive, but because our education is so high and we are so high performing, we are busing a ton of kids from the northwest side to the southwest side. So because of the choice, I'm not saying no to any child who shows up at our doorstep, because guess what? If we say no, this is where they're gonna go to, charter, choice, and private.
Yeah.
So and I know that private's going to say, you want a free laptop?
Yeah.
You want to speak Spanish? And I know their teachers aren't the Spanish teachers we have.
Yeah.
Hola, buenos dias. So I know what we have to offer. People can tell us what they want in the news, but I know what we have.
So
What do you think is different though, that in the southwest region for, because I agree with you, like with the enrollment and attendance piece, what do you feel like is different in the southwest region compared to the other regions?
Families. When you stay, you usually don't leave.
Well, that's kind of been like
That's the term.
what you guys have like captured too.
Right.
I mean, I do know people that have left Southwest
Absolutely.
schools and gone other places, and it's always because of safety things or fighting or like arguing with other parents and stuff like that.
So taking the comments here, how can MPS more effectively attract and retain students in your region? So what you just made an interesting comment is many students are not from your region. Is that a problem or not? Because those regions are low.
Many are from our region, but there are, I mean, maybe that's something on the dashboard we should look at, but maybe just think about that. All of the southwest region, how many students are neighborhood students? That's actually,
That's what we need to
makes
know.
me think about the data. How many are our neighborhood students? How many are transfer students from other regions? Because, are they northwest region, southwest, or northwest, east? What's the composition, central? Because sometimes if they are CO'd in, if they are special ed especially, to your point, if they are, you get in a spat with a parent, we don't get along, I'm out. Had a situation today, I had to leave PLI, to go almost lock down a school, because it was a tiff between, a parent would not leave. And it was just a transfer in.
And I think we're gonna be addressing where students are coming from and how many are local within the transportation section in the next meeting. But definitely the Southwest does have those over enrollments, people are coming to them. So it's less of an idea of filling schools or kind of, it doesn't have the same issues that all the other regions kind of do when it comes to that. So
I guess I'm curious, this isn't necessarily specific to our region, but for kindergarten enrollment and even I guess high school enrollment, does MPS like send home mailers, for example, for every, like, we know the census data, right? We know which household has, you do, cause I have coworkers that
So
don't
I get leaflets from like all the elementary schools around me, sending them to me.
Well, so
like,
that is
to
school
send my
specific
kids to
though.
another school.
That
like,
isn't necessarily,
but
so that's school specific, so like
Oh,
schools
yeah.
can send out stuff, but that's not districts.
Correct.
In terms of like, now, like I live in Tosa, I get a mailer once a month about enroll your child in K3, enroll your child in K4, and I have a 2-year-old, like, so I just like. That communication I feel like is very good in terms of like the frequency that I receive it and like I know the timeline. But like I have coworkers who have kindergarten age kids and haven't received anything, or.
So I think that's a good point, I think that's a district consistency piece we have to get our arms around, because I think it could be a regional piece, like, we talk about attendance, enrollment every day in the Southwest. It's our lifeline, right, we're constantly on that. But, for example, you must live in a particular spot that.
I live on Oklahoma and 8th Street.
Are
so
you getting
8th Street.
Southwest
I'm in Southwest.
Yeah,
like,
so that's why
the,
you're
like,
getting
various,
the-
like,
Okay,
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
that's good, good, yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, I've gone and knocked on doors for our school too, we've done that.
What school are you?
My elementary, I'm three schools technically. I'm Zablocki right now for elementary school,
Yay.
Wedgewood for middle school, and Wilby Reagan for high school.
Ah, you are, we should get swag for you.
I am a Southwest,
Driving to,
yeah,
perfect, I
yeah,
love
so
that.
and I wanna stay involved in my elementary school, this is our last year there, so, but I'll stay.
Oh, wait, we'll find you another
I
school.
went and picked up garbage there over the
Awesome.
weekend, but that's when I wanted to say, like, effectively attract and retain students when we're looking at some of these schools. Like, it is like the look of the school too, like, are there piles of trash in front of it? Are there, you know,
So you
like,
have Mr. Wolf as the blocky.
Yeah.
Every time I go up to my schools, I do it.
yeah,
usually
Mr. Wolf is very nice,
He's
yeah.
awesome, Mr.
But-
Wolf, you know.
Yes, Mr. Wolf is great, but like that kind of stuff, I know that's hard, but, and they have a green team to clean up stuff too. But like,
I feel like I'm gonna take her and steal her on all my drives.
I'll come and talk about the self, yeah, I mean, like,
you were saying earlier, though, like a lot of parents may not have the time or ability to walk through, see how full classrooms are and stuff, so you're really looking at a book from the cover. for when
or a
you're-
leaflet that comes in the mail.
If you
or-
get it,
If
though.
you get it, yeah, or like what your friends are telling you, and if all your friends are sending their kids to different schools, I don't know, or like charter schools or whatever, you know, like, I don't know, it's hard because it's been a while since I applied to kindergarten, now we're moving on, but, I mean, that was interesting that someone said something about Hamilton too, at the beginning, like, what can you do to make Hamilton be a better school? Like, I don't know, when I thought about high schools, like, I only thought about Reading.
Yeah, I was just saying, why did you
Get a
want
bad
to?
rap.
Pardon?
I think because people think that it's the best high school and,
Wisconsin.
yeah,
I think the schools get a bad rap because they're not advertised of the things that they are actually doing and what is actually taking place within the schools. And so I think we have to do a better job at letting the public know that there are good things in all of these schools. There are tracks in all of these schools. It's the blue tape, it doesn't work.
Yes, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
right, they're following the rules.
like about sports or
Right,
clubs.
the clubs,
or
the
like-
sports, all of those things, or whatever that is, that piece, so our middle school is technology and communication, so we have to build on that so they can know. And so we're bringing the STEM piece and the robotics piece to the middle school, because the high school has it too. So we flip it, we bring it to the middle school too, and we just keep it going, because it makes sense. That's the attraction. Hey, if you can stay here and go over there and do the same thing and build upon that.
There is like a general good information about Audubon going out around the community, from what I understand, especially for high school too. People
Do
say
you
good
have
things about
a
it.
social media?
Huh?
You have social media accounts for your schools?
I have no idea,
I feel like that's
and I'm not sure for you.
I'm also curious,
positive, yeah, like,
how many people that are not, that are maybe don't have kids yet in school are searching out the social media. That's the only thing I'm curious about. Like if your kid goes to that school, of course, you're looking at what's happening, what's going on and stuff, but yeah, I think it's, I mean, all the schools for the most part have the core things, but it's some of these specialty things that just really grab people, and it really comes down to a kid just doesn't know what they enjoy until they know it sometimes. There might be a kid that his family is pushing him way towards sports, and he does a school play or something, and he finds out that this is the coolest thing ever, and he thought, well, I would never do a school play or something, but just a for instance, or someone that's not into music, and then, their elementary school has music, and then now they found that this is actually calming me down and really this is kind of something cool, or I feel all the schools should, I mean, Bradley Tech, it's great to have a super focused school on trades, but I think every single high school should have a couple parts of trade or just something, just
They're niche.
just so that, just so that, or even if it's not a niche, even if it's the same program in every school, just to at least have students be aware that, hey, it's not looked down upon if you don't spend 8 years at college,
They do
becoming a
actually,
doctor.
there's, I was gonna say, most high schools now have NAF, the National Academy Foundation, which is career focused pathways, and I honestly wanna say it's almost in every single high school.
So.
I just found out about that, like, earlier this year. That we had that. Might have been-
So you guys are kind
Right.
of touching on number 3 a little bit, and I was gonna real quick, that would be the last one, what are the enrollment trade-offs between larger and smaller schools? How should MPS approach school size to best support students while maximizing district resources, because based on what Nick shared with us, right? There's some trade-offs.
If the Audubon is smaller, and we still have that, and we still have.
Because that's funded by Perkins.
Oh, yeah, that's true. But we still have the PE lab, so I don't know.
Okay.
When you get those.
What's your enrollment?
For the high school,
Yeah.
almost 500 and something, but that's not bad.
Well, yeah, what did you say, 500 was the number for high school
Yeah.
enrollment?
Right.
Yeah, but some of them are way more than that.
Is it
One
an
unusual, a number of high schools for MPS compared to other districts?
Wait,
We
have
like a lot of more high schools.
in Wisconsin, we're.
Well, yeah, but it's,
No, but I meant like just for like
For the urbans?
like
For the
because there's
number of
so-
high school
yeah,
students we
for how
have,
many,
do we
yeah.
have a lot of high school programs?
like percentage.
I guess a lot of our high schools are under enrolled, if you look at some of that data, so I
Yeah,
would
what-
say there's what you bring up could be a possibility. Cause there are several that are
I
way
guess
under.
I wonder, so this does kind of go back to the first question, but also like the fourth question. So like at Reagan, for example, we accept about 420 kids every year, but with that, we only actually see about 370 of them. And so I guess I'm curious, and I know where a lot of those kids go, but there is this gap of about 50 to 100 kids every year where they go to charter and parochial schools, when they've then taken a seat potentially away from a kid
I
who would.
know.
So like, I just think it's a really interesting.
I know some people that might do that.
Oh, yeah, I already know who they are.
That
And
and,
like, well, not this year, but the following year, but like, they're like, oh, maybe we wanna go to St. Thomas.
They play the game.
And but we'll just apply to Reagan too.
Yeah.
Like, why are you, I can't, I was like, I don't understand why you guys are doing this, why wouldn't you just go to a school that you don't have to pay for?
It's a backup option to a backup
Yeah.
option, that's what I'm down to.
And they keep the seat until right before third Friday.
so to kind of touch on 5, I only have 1 minute left, so I'm gonna bring up a very interesting topic, is special ed. I think that policy consideration with the special ed needs that we have. And some students are needing more than what MPS classrooms have to offer. And sometimes parents are saying it's disruptive to the entire class. And I'm taking my kid because I don't care, I just don't care. Generally restricted environment. Whitefish Bay doesn't tolerate it. Shorewood. But, I mean, what more can we do? A success center? I just think it's a reality. When we think of what policy considerations should MPS explore to help address challenges related to enrollment, budget, and staffing, I think this is a real issue that we have to explore.
Sit down more and talk with parents before you just throw 3 kids into Bridget and say, hey, you go Bridget. Every kid.
We are slowly but surely making our way back over. Just FYI.
Hamilton, and she said, when we were at a meeting, Hamilton says, I'm not sending my child to Hamilton because of some of the behavior. So that was why, and that's why she was. kids to do that.
And
Just flat out.
And they blame,
You're not doing your job.
Do they ever have heroes in middle school or high school?
Absolutely.
Tons.
We can tell you staffing.
I don't think we do it right.
Not
Maybe
good.
Definitely.
Okay, I don't even, it's very mysterious, but I hear about
All right,
I'm saying.
if y'all wanna wind down, we'll share out.
So that we can give our children
Oh, I'll
what they
sit
need.
with you,
Yeah.
Mr. Casey.
Educational class we're
Oh,
going on.
he's sitting there, so
Are
I'll
we-
just move my chair over so we don't
There
have.
has to be.
Oh, no, I won't.
And.
Take this.
That's all right, I'll just sit over here.
Yeah, I think they both did, yeah.
Are we serving all of our students the best?
Right.
Because if the
Right.
weather is triangular and not very,
Right.
because, you know, I.
And if our facilities are switched.
Right. And we have, the thing about this, we teach,
Did you all decide who's sharing?
I got elected.
Crystal.
Appreciate it.
We only got really.
I know, it's hard to push and pull and not be
And
like,
that's
all right, that's enough
That's
of
our
that.
project manager.
Yeah.
We all get 2 minutes.
Yeah.
We got 5
Next time, you know, we
questions.
should do timer. Like, we got
Okay.
2 minutes on this question, we have to move on to the
But
next.
the
We
idea
gotta go,
also,
we gotta move,
the
yeah.
guy was moving so fast, that I forgot to mention, was not to get through every question.
Oh, good,
This was
okay.
more to be like a menu of like, what's jumping out at you. I
Oh,
should have
okay.
mentioned, like,
Or
you have to start
next
it.
time we start from opposite ends.
I was gonna say, we also didn't have to start at the top.
This is free and appropriate education.
All right.
But really, our thing for 1 and 2 were answered at the same time.
Yeah, we did, we
Yeah,
did.
I feel like we got a little bit through three
Yeah.
or four as well.
Yeah.
All right. We wanna wind down and come back together. Thank you all so much. So, I'm gonna arbitrarily call this group A and this group B. Anybody feel inspired to go first, just to share out? Hopefully you've identified somebody in your group to sort of give a quick summary of your talking points and what you covered. And I was just saying, apologies for not mentioning at the top that you did not need to get to every question. So if you did, kudos, and that's very impressive. If you didn't, that's totally fine. Yeah, who would love to start or even be willing to?
I'll kick it off, Joanne.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, so our group got real passionate about that first question, so we drove it home through all 5 of them, kind of touched base on a little bit, but one of the biggest things that we kind of focused on was that first question, which is, what factor do we think drives school selection? And for us, it was reputation, word of mouth, the neighborhood culture, so wherever that school is, if it's in a good neighborhood, it's a good school, if it's in a bad neighborhood, it's probably a bad school. The size of the school, and then specialty. And then we kind of went on a bit of a different direction and focusing on specialty, and we think that that's a big advantage that MPS has compared to other schools that we are competing with. And we talked about how MPS has the Montessori schools, and they have the art schools, and they have all these, like Bradley Tech, that's trade school, and we have all these specialty schools that we think could be to our benefit when promoting what we can offer to students, and how do we get that in front of parents? Me and another member in our team were talking about how we did our research when it came to selecting schools for our children and grandchildren, and we wanted schools that best fit them, but not all parents are able to do that. So how do we put that in front of them? How do we give them their options? How do we help them make decisions that are gonna best be suitable for their student and the student's interest? And then how do we even put that in front of the student, right? How do we get the student interested in thinking about what it is they're interested in and what do they want to pursue? Because I think that's gonna be a big determining factor on how committed they become to the school and how interested they are in learning. And so the big thing and the big conversation that we had was like, how do we use that to our advantage? How do we showcase that? And I think that's pretty much
As
it.
far as we got.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first we got right, wrapped it up then.
Yeah, if there's anything other y'all wanna add, that was, But otherwise, yeah, I feel like that was it too. I think the one piece I heard y'all talk about that we didn't mention as much was just like the sort of media coverage aspect and how that shows up differently for different school providers and the impact that that has on things, so. But yeah, thank you so much for
Class
sharing.
size too, of their,
What's
their
it?
paras.
Yeah, staffing.
And the choice made between, preference between having larger classes and 2 paras versus three smaller classes and no paras.
Mhm.
It seemed to be the leading direction. So smaller classes are still preferred over a larger class with 2 paras. That is correct, what I heard.
No, I mean, that's not what,
That's what I thought I heard.
well, what we were talking about is the funding and the discretionary funds and how teachers and the principals can determine. And I just gave the example, like our principal makes sure that there's a para in every classroom. He takes his funds that way. And I think that's what it was, because our school doesn't have the room to have smaller class sizes.
But to your point, you know, if we just do the math, say you have 60 children and you're gonna divide them up either into 2 classrooms where you can afford 2 teachers and 2 paras, or you split them, and now you got 30 kids in each classroom, but you got a para, or do you do 20, 20, and 20, and in each case now you have a certified teacher or someone close to that working with a classroom of 20 versus 30. Personally, I think I'd rather have a classroom of 20 as a teacher than a classroom of 30.
Well, the other
And
variable
the
that-
dollars for the teacher and parents is the same,
yeah,
so there's
the
no
other-
cost difference between those 2 scenarios.
the cost I would variable I would say is the space, right? And we'll get into
Yeah.
that too when we talk about the buildings. But yeah, question for,
I would say as the regional superintendent of the Southwest, parents will talk to me and principals obsess with me. I obsess with principals as their supervisor about the state report card and S identification. Everybody wants to know about those stars. What is their identification? The chat on social media is where are you and how do you rank with others? They want the best school. People will tell you about other things. It's not about class size. They wanna know, where does your school perform? How does it rank with Whitefish Bay, with Shorewood, with Brookfield? And where does MPS stack up? Within all of the MPS schools, where does your school rank?
I agree with you.
And that's really important, because if they live in MPS and they live in some and realtors showing them around, and they're gonna live in MPS, they work somewhere downtown, or they're gonna commute and be in one part of the town or the other. They want to, and right, Mr. Spider? They want to understand how everybody stacks up. And now we're so data rich, information poor, they can do 1, 2 clicks away and figure out where everybody stacks up. So it is really important.
that's great, yeah, thank you for sharing. That was something that had come up in the other room too, just talking about, I know.
I think that's one of the, how MPS can improve, because I think it's media, because I was just giving the example that my grandson's going to School of the Arts, but he's in a district where he could be going to Whitnall, and their state cards are very close. The numbers are really close, but people don't know that MPS and Whitnall High School, you know, there are a lot of MPS high schools that meet or exceed some of the other high schools' state scorecards. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank goodness for
Yeah.
social media.
But
So-
they don't know, because they don't, you know.
Yeah. No, I know we're short on time and I wanna make sure the other group
Okay.
has a chance to report out. And the rest of the stuff is gonna be mostly takeaway, so I wouldn't worry too much about that, but anybody feel willing to share out about group A?
I took some notes, but people have to fill in the gaps. We also got stuck on question 1 for a while, but we had talked about, very similar to the other group, how Kate schools just have less transition for kids, how a lot of people follow other neighbors. So an example was there's a population of Hmong students maybe on the north side that are going to a south side school, but they just know from word of mouth with either their neighbors or their own community. We talked about school safety, and that's why parents come or stay at their school. And then we did discuss the specialty programs similar to the other group. And a question that kind of came up is like what specialty programs are offered in the Southwest region as compared to the other regions. You did pull up it based on school board director, but that's not quite aligned with like this model, yeah. We talked about the communication piece and like how schools portrayed by either friends, family members, or other people in that school community. And building appeal. So if you're in a neighborhood and you drive by that school or walk by that school and it doesn't look great, are you gonna send your kid there versus if it's beautiful, you might wanna send your kid there just by based on outside appearance. Another question that came up was how many students are neighborhood, or how many kids are enrolled in the Southwest region that are neighborhood, based on their neighborhood school. I don't know if I'm phrasing that correctly.
That sort of live within.
Yes,
the
yeah, thank
boundaries.
you, there we go, that's, yeah. We did get some interesting information about like the budget numbers based on like what is the most sustainable. So essentially the cutoff for like elementary schools is at least an enrollment of 200 or more, and then 500 or more students for solid high school enrollment that can meet some basic funding needs, but that means more like basic needs, not necessarily any extras.
Right.
Like, that was something that we briefly talked about.
And one of the things that came up, I forgot to mention this, but it just popped in my head a few seconds ago. When we were talking to school counselors, and some of the counselors were saying that internal talk from the teachers to tell the fifth graders where to go is also a barrier, because if those teachers are telling the parents, don't you go to Wedgewood, don't you go to here, don't you go to there, that's a bad school. That's internal issues and barriers, and it does happen. And that's one thing that has to
We had
stop.
that happen to us.
You mean they
That
go
is not-
negative?
They go negative, and that has to stop.
And I will say that you did a really good job of pitching Audubon to my fifth grade class.
We did the last question, we briefly talked about, or Dr. Gamblin did mention like special education and how can we provide the best options and schooling ability for students who may not fit the regular ed environment, but still keeping them within the least restrictive environment and just looking how.
Just making
Yeah.
sure like all students are getting what they need. And really just providing, like making sure IEPs are met, which they are. But also making sure that regular ed students are getting what they need too. And making sure those students that aren't identified, that have more social and emotional needs, now that mental health is also with COVID.
Right.
In the pandemic. We just have poverty and just a lot that, other districts with higher socioeconomics may not have. And I don't know if we're that equipped with our teacher shortages and our permit teachers, our international teachers. We're all blessed and fortunate to have it, but let's be honest. If you are licensed and trained in the very traditional way and did well, etc., or if you're struggling, you might be challenged in how to meet the needs of every student. And so we have to be thinking alternatively, and we have to be thinking about other innovative ways to meet the needs of every student.
Is it possible? Like, is that an unrealistic goal to meet the need of every student?
I do not believe that. I get up every morning thinking that I can, and it's probably my Pollyanna attitude, but I'm also realistic too. But I just am willing to do whatever it takes, and in the Southwest region, we believe in doing that. And I think for those families who are with us, they're grateful, and for those that have left us, I think they're realizing the grass isn't always greener.
Right. And all I would say to that, it's a very difficult question to answer, but generally is like, I think our focus here is really trying to figure out how do we move things in the right direction, right? Like, how do we get things headed towards better? and focusing on making the student experience better and making experiences for families and et cetera, and staff like better and moving towards that instead of away from it. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm going to move through the remaining pieces. The community insights form, so if you want to scan the QR code, it's live. You're welcome to do it now, but the way that we're doing this is a little different. So we're going to have the responses sort of roll up from the other regions as well. So when you scan this, you should see the responses that have come in. There's a few from the East region that came in from last night. They also have that survey, so there might be more trickling in as we go. And you can sort of upvote ones that you agree with or downvote if you don't feel like it's as relevant, and just kind of help us understand what you think the most sort of pertinent questions might be that we could be asking the wider stakeholder community. You know, we're trying to make sure the questions are approachable, but ultimately we want to hear your ideas. So we'll work to sort of combine what we hear. If we hear a lot of similar ideas into questions and get those added to sort of sit there for the next month. So that, and one piece we didn't mention at the top with additional resources is getting a flyer for each meeting. So we're working on that, have it development, I would say, if not this week, then early next. But the plan would be after all the sort of March meetings finish up, that you would have this one-page flyer that says, here's what we talked about in March. You know, a quick summary of the talking points. Here's what we're going to be covering in April. Here's how you share your input. And really just having something that's easy for you to share out. So you're not saying, here, go watch a 90-minute recording or go read a 2-page Word doc on the notes. So yes, that'll be there too for the folks who want to do that, but really trying to, you know, create a different array of things. So just on the look ahead piece, transportation and programming, as we mentioned, looking at program offerings, how things are distributed geographically. And then if you want to take a look at the places webpage, excuse me, that should be programs, it's half updated. My apologies for the typos here and there tonight, but programs page will be more focused on what we're going to be looking at. And then there is some transportation data on the people page as well. But this is just kind of a list of sort of what those next steps are for each group. And that is pretty much it. So yeah, we'll be getting the follow-up survey out to you all tomorrow. That community insights from question development will be part of that as well. So no need to do it now unless you are feeling inspired. And then again, all the materials should be in Google Drive. And yeah, we're just happy to have you all here with us tonight. So thank you again. Happy to hang around if there's any lingering questions or clarifications that would be helpful. Otherwise, thanks again and for catching on to the location change last minute. We appreciate that you all found us and get home safe.
I have a question.
Absolutely.
So, going to be